Hello guys, back for another episode. Today we are going to be going over flexibility versus mobility. I think it's a great topic to try and get people to understand. I think there's a lot of confusion out there about what is the difference, which one do you use, and
what makes lasting change,
and understanding that if you are doing a high active sport that demands a lot of range in your sport, whether it's CrossFit, it's track and field, or football, or a sport that's very demanding on the joints and the ligaments and the muscles, you have to put in a protocol of staying loose. It's just a point where you use your muscles a lot and it's just hard graft and intense, they will get tight. Even bodybuilding, if you're breaking down muscle fibers and they're building back bigger, they can become stiff and tight if you're not putting in a protocol in there. So we're going to go through a lot of things to not make it too confusing, because I found for me going into the flexibility and mobility, which I've been very keen on learning over the years, it's very, very complex. It's almost like I've learned that you've got to separate it from your training. It is training. It can be training on its own, because the intensity of the levels of your flexibility can leave you pretty sore the next few days. And when you're starting to express into new range, you've now got pretty much a bit of a weaker muscle.
You've got to learn the movement. I think there's there's lots of different schools of thoughts with this.
Yeah, there is.
And it is still something that's evolving in terms of like strength training. It dates back hundreds of years. Like the barbell was created in, I think it was like 1880 sometime. So strength training's been around for over 100 years, whereas this stuff is very new.
Yeah.
This stuff, as you said, like it's only come about in the last kind of 5 to 6 years predominantly, since like you've been in the CrossFit gym and like I've been in as well.
Yeah,
seeing you and talking to you.
You've been more aware of it. It's don't get me wrong, training is a great way of preventing injuries, but as long as your flexibility or mobility protocol is alongside, then you'll be able to train harder and do a lot more. So if we get on to the first topic, is flexibility versus mobility. What is the difference? Do you understand there's a
difference?
There's a slight difference. Yeah. They are.
Which one do you do? I think that's the thing. You say, I'm just going like doing some flexibility stuff, or you say I'm doing mobility stuff, and you sit in static stretching. But basically, mobility.
So mobility, if we go with mobility is the one that everyone goes, I'm going to do some mobility work. So it's the ability of a joint actively moving through a range of motion. So it's basically, it's your movement. It's your loaded, it can be your loaded movement. So it can be anything from your squat. It could be anything from your, moving in where you want to go with that range. So that's your mobility. It's taking that joint through the range. Yeah,
through the full range, and predominantly, it might not always be under load, but predominantly under load because it's an active position. So Charles Poliquin, one of the great strength trainers of our time, pioneers, he always said strength is gained in the range that it's trained.
Yeah.
So that's mobility.
It's
the range of movement with load or under tension. Okay, so think about a back squat. Why some people can sit arse to grass like yourself?
Yep.
Because you have strength in the whole range of movement. And that's what you're saying about you start building new ranges and you have to learn them. You have to learn them over time. So, mobility is doing your strength protocols. It's doing your positional work that is actively creating a neurological adaptation to the muscle.
Yeah, that's right. Then we move into the flexibility, which is ability of a muscle to passively lengthen through a range of motion. So ideally, that's your static stretching.
It's just static. Yeah, it's passive. It's passive. That's why us as coaches, we see people that are like incredibly good at yoga, incredibly flexible, have done like all sorts of long stretching throughout their life, but they come into a gym and they want to squat a barbell and they only can do a half squat.
Yeah.
Because they can passively get into an incredible range, but goes back to the mobility. They don't have the strength
to go into that range. Yeah, that's it. And it's building the strength through that range. Even though they can be flexible, it's building the strength and that's further down the line in this topic today. We're going to start talking about how the nervous systems and stuff like that can come into play. But that's your pretty much a difference between mobility and flexibility. And then I think you can then channel that into 3 categories. So we can have a movement, an active, and a passive. So if we think about the movement, a dynamic to use full range through the strength training exercises, that's Romanian deadlifts, that's split squats,
something that's putting you through those long positions.
Those long positions, yeah.
So like the split squats are a perfect example. Kind of like you can't get into a back squat position because there's a lot going on, and sometimes, and there's a coach that talks massively about how back squats, he doesn't think of functional Eugene. He talks about like get on a leg press, get into a better range, or get onto a split squat where you're putting the knee and hip through an even greater range than what you might be able to achieve on a back squat. Same goes back to the mobility. You build strength in that range. Then you come back to your back squat and you can hit new-found positions. So I know one of your favourites is it's called the ATG split squat now. I think it's recently named. That's new. Like
so Ben Patrick is this new
phenomenon
who's blasted through Instagram. That's how I found him. And basically, he was a basketball player.
And he's fucking flexible.
He is now, but he'd spent a long time playing basketball and had a really bad knee, and spent from what I know, he spent a lot of money on cosmetic surgery. He spent about $10,000 on rectifying this knee, and then after that,
they basically said you're never going to.
Basically, they said you're never going to have that knee flexion again, and he was like, okay. And then he started working on these knee over toes, the ATG split squat, and using the slant board and taking it through range, and then he could slam dunk, which he never done before.
He can move. If you ever check him out on Instagram, he's just called Knees Over Toes Guy, right?
The Knees Over Toes guys, and it's definitely fits into the flexibility and mobility world of like, look, not only do you have to take care of the muscle, but you've got to take care of the tendons and the ligaments as well, and express them into new ranges to make it, to get away from injuries.
Yeah, and I think like even if you are injured, the great thing, or the thing to take into account is like if you injured yourself in a certain movement or a certain movement pattern, and as you said, like I'll use your knees going over your toes as an example. But if you've injured yourself in that pattern, like the first thing you're thinking is, I never want to go back into it. But you need to obviously heal, reduce inflammation, get to a point that there's no pain, and then put it back into the position where you potentially got injured. So you're building, as I said, mobility, flexibility back into that.
And I literally found him the last previous lockdown, I really sprained my ankle. Like I thought I'd fractured it. So I went in,
fell off a curb.
Fell off a curb. Did yesterday. Like an idiot. But it was bad. It was swollen. It was bruised, and I lost a lot of range in that foot from that. Had the X-rays. Thank God it wasn't fractured, but I lost it, and then. Just browsing, I found Knees Over Toe Guy, and I started putting those protocols. Within 3-4 weeks, I had more range than I've ever had in that ankle, and it was just being consistent, working with exercises and moving it. And we do probably see with people with the back squat, probably the biggest restriction is their dorsiflexion. So if that ankle stops that knee from moving forward, obviously it's going to start pushing them back, and then that's when we're going to see the hinge come in, and it looks like a folding squat rather than a nice coming down through the middle squat. So
a nice piece of paper.
Yeah. So basically, with the movement, you're looking to lengthen through centric loading, concentric shorten the muscles, and time under tension, and that's a good way of building through your first stage of mobility.
Yeah, and I think the movement selection is huge on that, and like with any training is. I doubt you went into like adding extra dorsiflexion with load straight away. You've got to do it.
Oh yeah, no, straight away. If you're doing that, it's body weight.
Yeah, it's working in
body weight, and then it's
you can.
Yeah, and then I was putting my front foot elevated as well, so, even on a box, just working on pushing that
extra
knee forward
through the hip.
Yeah. You don't want to just, like I say, as we go further down, when we get into the topic of doing too much or going too hard, it can have a reverse effect on your flexibility and mobility.
As we touched, like exercise selection with that is going to be paramount, and exercise selection that's in your training. If you've got tight hamstrings because you potentially sit all day, you said the Romanian deadlift's a great movement.
Yep.
What you're doing is you're focusing on the eccentric, so the lengthening portion of a muscle, because muscles predominantly just work in two ways. They work in like lengthen and shorten.
Lengthen and shorten. And we know there's a good few studies now on the hamstrings to be that Nordics are supposed to be one of the best strengtheners and lengtheners that you can do.
Insert clip of you doing a Nordic.
Yeah,
if you can.
I'll try. I'll do one on the GHD because
okay.
that I can do. But yeah, they are again. Because if you look, especially if we touch to the point back to CrossFit, you know, there's very little hamstring work that gets done. It's called for, like you need your hamstrings in deadlifts, you need your hamstrings in the Olympic lifting. But if you're coming in and you haven't done any, you know, isolated hamstring work, you're more likely not turning them on and you're becoming a very quad dominant athlete. Because you can get away from it. You can turn them off and go, yeah, I'll let my quads do it. Even a kettlebell swing. How many times do we see people driving through the legs rather than actually hinging
quads and
driving through the glutes and the hamstrings because they're tight? And you know, a simple test, a toe touch. If you can't touch your toes, you definitely need to start working some protocols on getting those hamstrings flexible because it will burden you in your training.
And I think like another thing with the CrossFit, and I know this is something that stuck in my head from when you spoke about bodybuilding, which we'll go into a second, but there's not much time in CrossFit where you're under eccentric load.
Yeah,
you're going
very fast.
Yeah, you're in a back squat. You basically just drop and bounce.
Dropping down. If you look at wall balls, it's really get down quick to explode.
Deadlift, it's just drop, bang, and
Foster's the same thing. Because when you are doing expressional movements like that in CrossFit, it's all about consuming energy. So the last thing you want to be doing in a thruster is be holding that bar constant tension through, because if you're doing all the eccentric loading on the way down, obviously that's going to use a lot more energy. So if you're doing a workout like Fran, you know, those first 21 thrusters are going to burn you out. So the whole point is about driving that bar up and then moving with the bar on the way down. So there's not a lot of stress and not a lot of load, and then you power out the bottom.
I think there was some interesting data, the study that James Fitzgerald spoke about, or went in quite depth with it, about how eccentric loading is basically the most fatiguing stage of a movement pattern. If you think about it, eccentric, like the lengthen, then you've got isometric, so a hold, and then the concentric, which is a shorten. The most fatiguing, and which is the most predominant in the DOMs and how you feel really sore, is the eccentric loading.
Yeah.
So I remember in bodybuilding, as I mentioned, you spoke about how bodybuilders are really fucking good at like just yanking weights and they'll get huge off that. But you said years ago you worked with some people and you just said, okay, now we're going to add some like tempo. We're going to slow it down. And they fucking struggled. The weights just dropped from like a 50 kilo row to like a 10 kilo row.
I've got a good bodybuilder friend, my friend Amir, who's a big guy. And I've trained with him a few times. And I remember he came down here and he's a big, massive bodybuilder, phenomenal physique. And I just expressed a bit of tempo training with him and how difficult it was, just taking him through a little bit of tempo range, a bit of more contraction, slowing it down. And that's how Dorian Yates used to train. And that's why he used to make bodybuilders physically throw up.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just about bam, bam, bam. He used to make them really contract, hold, where they're getting all those muscle fibers just to completely take over and build up that lactate. And it used to make them feel like, fucking hell, that was a different type of workout. So
your mate probably felt absolute trash the next day.
Yeah, so going through those ranges is really important. And we can't go on enough. Like time under tension, that is mobility training. You know, it's teaching you the motor control of the movement, but not only that, you're letting the muscles slowly understand, okay, we're going into this range and we're going to get strong into this range. So it is a big part of working through the movement.
Yeah, and as you said at the beginning, and we'll touch on more, it's like as you start to learn new ranges, like it's fatiguing, it's tiring.
It's tiring.
It's tough, right?
Yeah, it's hard, especially when you move through other flexibility, mobility work. It can be equally, like I can do a mobility, flexibility session where I'd rather be doing the heavy back squats, you know? And that's the thing, we'll talk later on more about it. It's being consistent with it. It's not fun to do, but the rewards at the end become much greater. Okay, so the next thing we go active, more static positions, using your own strength to hold positions. So using the antagonist training is an active training muscle groups that oppose or antagonize one or another. So to the antagonist muscle, hold yourself in a stretched position. So an example of that would be if I wanted to use the opposing muscles to the hamstring. So I could use the quads and the hip flexors. So sitting down on the floor and doing like pike leg lifts is going to then help me get into the hamstrings and then sit forward. So a perfect example, I know when people try and do L-sits. Yeah. This is where this naturally happens.
They're like, oh, my hamstrings are tight.
No, they don't get that. The quads cramp up. They're like, so
they think it's hamstring tension.
Yeah, but what it is, it's just like that is the hamstring pulling back. So because they haven't got the length to hold a nice leg out, what it does then, it puts more stress on the quad. So the quad is now going, shit, I want to straighten the leg, but the hamstring's not letting me straighten the leg. And that's where you can use the antagonist and the agonist to improve through flexibility range.
I know you've been working on your split, like the side split. Is it side split?
I'm working on both. I'm working on front split and side split now.
But so you'd think in the split, okay, I need to get really loose, like adductors, like inner thigh, and like, if I get them loose, I loosen my hamstring, that'll be fine. But there's so much, as you said, it goes back to the same thing: agonist, antagonist. It's like you need to get like looser hips. You need better hip
The hips need to be looser.
Hip flexors, everything.
I need to strengthen my adductors now, so I've been working
flexibility and mobility.
That's flexibility and mobility. So I've been working for a phase just doing a horse stance, which is very similar to the sumo. Basically, it's a sumo deadlift stance, but. Fuck me, it's really, really hard. But that is going to help work into the side split over time because I'm strengthening now those areas and expressing them to be able to go into better ranges. It's tough. It's tough work, but you've got to hang in there if you want it. And once you improve those ranges, it will improve your movement. So you will be better at what you do, and you will have low risk of injury, which is the most important part.
Yeah, there is a fancy name for the. We've got a definition here. It's called reciprocal inhibition, which basically means it describes the relaxing of a muscle on one side of the joint to accommodate contraction on the other side. On the other side. So as you were saying, you loosen your quads and your hip flexors, you'll be able to get into a better L-sit through those hamstrings.
And use the hamstrings, yeah.
So, and all of this is, like, it's not ultimately, like, a muscle thing. It's actually just a neurological thing.
It's very neurological. So, from reading through different case studies, and we know that the emergency brake system, so what's stopping you touching your toes is your nervous system goes, I've not been in that range.
He's going to hurt himself. Fuck.
He's going to hurt himself. Stop. And that's what it is. And then once you start being able to work with that and express new ranges, then it will start to go. So the biggest thing we probably see is if we go into a static stretch, especially if we go, right, come on guys, let's do this stretch. We see this all the time. People go from 1 to 5 straight away. So they're not going to sit in that static stretch long enough to actually let the nervous system go, okay, it's okay, and then relax the muscle. So that automatically they're resisting the stretch. So they're in there like 1 to 5, they can't breathe, they're profusely sweating, going, fuck me. Oh my God, 20 seconds, that's enough. And then they're done. And then they probably never go back to that stretch again because they've just had a fucking trauma experience with it. And they're going, fuck me, my mobility is really, really hard. That's the wrong way of doing it. You need to move into it steadily. It's just like anything, learning a new movement. You when you learn a back squat, we don't just go, right, here you go, load up a fucking bar, get it. It's like you move through it. You start with the air squat, you move through ranges. Your static position, especially if it's a bad one, you need to find a way where you can sit in there and start to work it over, I'd say 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Because once you get into there and then you work on your breathing as well, because that's a big part of the static stretching, inhaling and exhale. So you're going to inhale, it's going to feel like, holy shit, it's getting tight. And then when you exhale, naturally that's now letting the system go, okay, relax and let me move into it. And after 30, 40 seconds, you'll be like, okay, that's feeling a little bit more comfortable. Keep going, another 30 seconds. Oh, that's feeling, now you're starting to express and get into that further range. And then you just keep working it. Like, it's got to be consistent. So you've got to find that time. Right, I need to do this. I need to be able to touch my toes because it's a big problem. We've got to understand that I always refer to the toe touch because it's probably one of the tightest muscle groups to see is the hamstrings. A lot of people find that's going to lead to back injuries. You know, once they get tight, it's going to go up the back, and that's where a lot of back injuries can come. It can even start, like for me, my hamstrings were always super flexible, but I never spent any TLC work on my calves. So my calves were tight, and that's what's always, you know, aggravating my hamstrings, and then goes into my QLs, and now my QLs are super tight. So it's not the point, oh, I'll work my QLs. Yes, sweet, I've loosened them off in 2 weeks. Boom, 2 weeks later they're back tight because the cause of the problem is my calves.
It's just like everything. You're fighting the fire.
So you got
right in front of you rather than actually.
And normally where the big problem is, that's not what started it. So you got to do that chain reaction and start working down and going, right, I've got to loosen here and loosen there.
And that's like if you ever go to any kind of professional like physio, chiro, like osteo, any of them, it's that. They go from the source of the pain, and then they'll just go, because pain is the same thing, it's a neurological thing, it comes from the brain. So, yeah, it's not actually in the muscle unless there's like real trauma, but then there's still signals from the brain. But you work from, as you said, like if your QL's tight, okay, work from your QL. If that loosens it, okay, good, but still work, as you said, down the chain.
Down because
look down.
And it's the same thing when people go to see a chiropractor.
Yeah.
You know, you go in there, they click your bones, they realign you, you feel amazing, but the problem is, it's not the joints that have gone, it's the ligaments and muscles around the joints that have put you in there. So if you come out of that chiropractor and you don't do the required flexibility or mobility protocols after
conscious work in the gym
to make them stay open, within a week or two you're tight again, and then that's when I'd say to you, you've got a shitty chiropractor if they've not given you the right moves to do it. So they go, look, I don't want to see you in 3 weeks, and you know it's just all for the money. So be aware with that,
because next week
yeah, it's a point. If you're putting into like high intensity training, you've got to put in the work to recover. It's recovery protocol work, but it's got to be, you know, the thing is, it's time consuming. It can be boring. It can feel not very rewarding because it can take a long time to start to get. But when you start to get those ranges, not only are you going to be, you know, a lot stronger, you're going to start expressing movement a lot better, and leads more to the goals that you're trying to achieve.
I think if your whole warm-up is based around like passive stretching and mobilization is a bit different, but if your whole warm-up's based around passive stretching, sitting on a foam roller, rolling on a ball for a little bit, and you're like, okay, now I can move, it's like, that's the first issue, like why do you have to spend so long to be able to get into positions? But then at the same time, as we're saying, like a lot of this stuff is neurological. There's times where I'm like, oh shit, my fucking trap's tight. I'll roll it. 10 minutes later, it's exactly the same. It's just tighten back up.
And again, there's also neurological. There's also times of days where you'd probably be more looser, and then you'll be tighter, depending on your work. Hydration comes into it as well. Massive part. A lot of people probably dehydrated.
Well, genetics, like male, female.
Yeah, there's lots of other things that can play into it.
If you've spent like years doing flexibility and like banded stuff and shoulder passovers, and you're like, well, I still can't get into a snatch position, then you need to change the approach, change the exercise selection, change how you focus on it, like doing the mobility and the flexibility outside of training. Because as you said, same thing as the chiropractor, you do your flexibility, mobility before your session, but then you go into your session, don't focus on your movement, which is the thing that's really gonna reinvent the positions and get you out of bad habits, and then you just go home and that's it. You've not you basically like undone a little bit, but then done it back tenfold, and then gone home and be like, okay, I've done my mobility, I've done my flexibility, I've done my training, I'm good. That, like if you want long-term change, you got to separate them, put them apart.
You've got to spend time. You've got to spend time on it, and that's where we move into the third one, passive flexibility. It can be sitting in positions for longer durations of times, or where we go back to the antagonist and an agonist, and then you've probably heard of PNF stretching, which is
proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation. Fucking hell.
Yes, exactly. That's for me. That with my dyslexia, forget that one.
So I was going to let you do it, and I was just
I will not get that out. But it's a more advanced form of flexibility training, which involves both the stretching and contracting of the muscle groups being targeted. And then you'll hear of some coaches using the pails and rails, which is progressive angular isometric loading and regressive angular isometric loading. I feel these are both pretty much the same thing. And it's an isometric loading protocol. In other words, this is when stretching and contracting the muscles are being lengthened, stretched, followed by, again, the opposing muscles, just like the antagonist and the agonist.
You're basically putting yourself in that end range, and instead of being active and stretching it, you're trying to create a contraction.
Yeah.
An isometric hold, like you were doing one like the frog the other day.
I do it on the frog or with the butterfly. So one I can work is if I'm sitting against the wall, imagine I've got my butterfly here, I can then work a couple of dumbbells on the knees, and then I will work on lifting up, which would be the progressive angular isometric.
Yeah.
And then the regressive would be letting it go the other way.
I can't remember.
So it's it's basically like you're contracting and then you're
Relaxing.
contracting the other way.
Yeah.
Depending on the movement. It can get. This is where mobility and flexibility can get. Like I say, it becomes very complex, and it's like how you become a coach to learn how to train people here. This is just another whole realm of coaching and learning and stuff, and learning how to implement it and get people to understand it. But it is a very, very great way, again, of using those opposing muscles to literally instantly express new range.
Yeah, so this PNF, I'm not even going to fucking attempt it again.
Yeah, just call it PNF.
This PNF training has been around a lot longer than these like kind of newer schools of thought. So I remember back in school talking about it, and if you've ever been to like a physio or a chiro and they look at like your hip movement, they lift your leg up, maybe they put it on their shoulder, your leg's straight, they're like, okay, relax, they stretch into you, and now they're like, now drive against me hard,
which would be the progressive.
Yeah, and then for a couple of seconds you relax, then they can move you a little bit more range, so you can actually create significant degrees of range.
You'd be holding your leg and they would say, right, push into my hands, like 80% of tension. Then they'd say,
relax,
right,
move you a bit further,
exhale, and as soon as you exhale, you would literally go centimeters into a new range, because now you've just let the nervous system and everything just go, okay, let's. And it's a fantastic way.
You can try at home and see the difference yourself. Don't get the person who's doing it pushing you into ranges that are like uncomfortable. Yeah. Just go to kind of an end range where you're like, okay, I feel a little bit of tension, a little bit of tightness in my hamstring. You would want
to do this over a certain amount of breaths, and again, you would be in that position for probably about 90 seconds, with relax, maybe 3 to 4 PNF contractions going in, which would from there would take your leg to here, and it's a great way of, again, building through. That's what I mean. You've got to. Your mobility is going to be your training going through time under tension with a back squat. Then you could be working on some of these at the end to be moving through that range. That's even the thing.
Yeah, it's like you can do as much of this in your warm-ups, but it's not going to make the long-term difference. Where, as I said, like this, all this stuff blends. So you've got to do this passive like flexibility work to then be able to allow you into better positions that you can then create contractions in and build the mobility. So yeah, this stuff can get you into better positions, but then you've got like one of those positions by keeping light load or unloaded, and eventually building, and
you've got to do it, because we can see that sometimes if you are really tight in these positions, it is gonna take a long time. It's not going to be a quick fix. Everyone wants a quick fix, but it's just the same as like if I look at how I'm working my side splits now compared to my front splits. Front splits, I found pretty much the hamstrings were good to go. It was my hip flexor that was the block on that. So now putting in these protocols on some hip flexor work, it's now starting to release and move through nicely. I'm not far away from that. I think another 2-3 months I'll have the full front split on the floor comfortably. The side split, on the other hand, my adductors are a lot worse a state than my hip flexors. They're going to take a bit of time now, because now I've got to strengthen them. So I've got to do my strength training on them, going through like the horse stance again. and other stuff. And that could take me the best part of a year or more, but that's consistent training. So that's be me doing my side split work just 2 times a week. 2 times a week, and then just greasing the groove of other stuff, as I call it. There's greasing the groove, and that's when we can move into the mobility tools. Everyone grabs a foam roller. Like, I really find it a problem if you come into doing your training session and you're having to roll around on a foam roller and getting a band and pulling yourself all around and hanging to loosen yourself up for training. You have got a big problem.
As we said, that's just gonna create a neurological adaptation for a very short window.
It is.
So
it's a quick.
You've done your warm up.
It's a quick fix.
10 minutes
It's a quick fix. Like, there's loads of studies out there on foam rollers to say it works. It doesn't work. You can pull these studies up. Pretty much, I can tell you now, foam rollers are not a waste of time, but it is just like it's like an ibuprofen. It's just a short-term fix. It's not going to fix your mobility long term. Yes, it will maybe take a pain away from your whatever muscle is doing to get you training, but it's not. I wouldn't say. I'd say, look, it's something. If it makes you feel better, hey, use it. It's like with everything. If it makes you feel good, use it.
Every tool has its.
I think if you're really looking to express new range and get into better positions, that foam roller is not going to do that for you. The lacrosse ball is not going to do that for you. And then that's where we look into what do they really do? They're working on the tissue. Supposed to be the fascia,
which is like the layer between the skin and the muscle, and like basically if that gets super tight, and this is known. There's loads of like if anyone watches MotoGP, because they're basically constantly on their forearms.
Yeah.
Their fascia gets really tight. It constricts the muscle, and then basically it limits their movement or their endurance through the forearm. So a lot of MotoGP riders have that surgically, like basically sliced and opened up to release the tension in there.
Yeah.
When we say tightness of muscle, like the actual like knots and tightness in a muscle is. You're not gonna. It's not like a bit of string. Your muscle just doesn't go like that and create a knot.
No. It's like a build up.
It's just a saying. It's just a saying that makes people think, okay, this is a tighter muscle. But as we said, a lot of it's down to neurological. Unless yes, you've torn something, and then you've actually created structural change in the muscle.
And then when it does come down to a knot as well, normally the foam roller's not going to get rid of it because you're not going hard enough on that knot.
No.
Because it's fucking painful. And if you've had a good sports massage and they know what they're doing and they find the knot, you'll know.
It ain't like you're relaxing massage.
You'll know when they're on that, and it takes a good bit of pressure to actually get rid of that. Which most of the time, when people are on a foam roller, they go, "Oh, I don't like that bit. I'm going to move away," and then they go onto a nice, relaxing part of the muscle. So there we can see that it's pretty pointless when you look at it like that, unless you're doing it properly. But again, I wouldn't rely on the tools. I would revert back to what we've just talked about: mobility, flexibility.
Like
Going through the active
range.
and passive ranges, finding static stretches, working on PNF, working on moving those ranges. That's going to give you the long term.
But as you said, like every tool or everything has its place. It has it, and this is where exercise selection and this can be seen as exercise
and don't get me
selection.
wrong, there's sometimes where I feel like, right, my traps are really
nice
stiff.
it's nice.
And I get a lacrosse ball and I roll and it does work. And I will go, it works for me. And then we have the highly fucking priced massage guns, which, hey, I've used them a couple of times and you do feel great. But again, is that giving you long-term flexibility? No, it's just making you get rid of that. Oh, I feel a little bit loose. I feel nice now. But that it's not solving the problem.
It's like a Black and Decker drill.
Well, it was, wasn't it? Black and Decker drill.
Back in the day. And there is, like, I don't know if it's on here, but if anyone's ever used a TENS machine, complex thing, they're a little bit different because it's all to do with electrical impulses.
So it's just flushing, isn't it?
Yeah, it's actually
creating pushing blood and taking it through.
It's just creating contractions in the muscles, and that's then you can use it for the tendons to try and create as much stimulation to get blood there. So yeah, there's probably you're probably going to get a little. I haven't done massive amounts of research on the difference between the two because the guns are pretty new, but the TENS machines, they've been around for years now, so there's definitely a lot more data to show that they've got a better better adaptation. They actually work to an extent because they use the electrical impulses that your brain's basically creating, whereas massage guns just beating the shit out of yourself.
Yeah.
But if you've got
it's like I say, you can go and see someone and then they'll lie you down, they'll do some cupping, they'll do some scraping, they'll use a massage gun, you come out, you feel great, but that's not going to give you your flexibility.
No, and this is the same thing we spoke about with training, everything. It's just it's a band-aid.
It's a different mobility. It's like, it will get rid of a knot, it will help release maybe a bit of fascia, what's tight there, but it's not going to make you touch your toes. It might make you touch your toes there and then, but then tomorrow, wake up in the morning, you're going to see your back and that's where you've got to express the range through the other protocols of flexibility and mobility.
Yeah. So we're not saying like any of these therapies we're not poo-pooing them. We're not saying I don't do them because I get.
Listen, I love. I've done a cupping course. I cup myself frequently. I fucking love it. Probably do it a little bit too hard sometimes, but it works for me. It helps release some. There's studies there saying it doesn't release fascia, or it makes me feel like it fucking does. So I don't mind that.
It releases some tension.
Yeah, and then there's probably one of the. I think probably one of the best therapies you can get when we get into it is dry needling. I think. The way I heard the expression of this is, if you've got your problems like an onion, every time you're using a massage gun or a foam roller, you're just maybe moving one layer off that onion, where if you get dry needling, you're like right into the pin heart of it.
As we know from what Shrek says, onions have layers.
Yeah.
If anyone's a Shrek fan. But dry needling, and quite interesting to... I was talking to, I see I think she's a chiro. I don't know, but she does dry needling, and as you said, like unbelievable stuff. And talking to her about it, it's interesting. Just like it's probably everyone's like, if you hate needles, they're actually incredibly thin, and you don't actually feel it. It's just like a little prick sometimes. Yep. Sometimes you don't even feel it, but
sometimes it's like a fucking electric shock.
Yeah, because that's when you show that you've got like a muscle that's super contracted.
I've literally had it. So I've got a good osteopath called Dan who's done it before, and he actually put the little electrodes on it. So he's sending a voltage through it, and then when he pulled it out, he went, "Tris, look at this." And there was a gigantic dry needle, but it was literally in a horseshoe shape. And I said, "Why have you bent it?" He goes, "No, that's happened inside. That your contraction has done that inside." I was like, "Fucking hell!"
Yeah,
but it's a great therapy. So how we're going with these therapies, it's like it depends on how severe you are, and this is where it can turn into like you're injured with your mobility, or it's just a case of you need to grease the groove. There's different. It depends on the level where you are. Now, if you're not too bad, you can grease the groove, do some of the the flexibility work, some static holds, some PNF. That might be enough. If you've got something that's looking more into an injury, that's when you're going to look to see a specialist and get some of these therapies done to also help. And not only that, sometimes having an MOT once a month, like just a go over to make sure everything's aligned, a good sports massage, a bit of dry needling. It's great, especially if you're doing a lot of high outputs of training. But that doesn't mean you just see that person and then you avoid.
It's not the root cause.
No, you've got to put in your protocols.
Things that can get you into a better position.
You've got to do your flexibility work. You've got to do your mobility work. And that's where we can turn into when do you prioritize it? When do you do it? What is the best time to do it? Like I feel a lot of the time we see, especially in classes, we see the good bit of the dynamic warm-up, shall we say, that gets you going. And I feel like a dynamic warm-up is great. So you can express some of those yoga moves in a dynamic warm-up. It just means you're not going to sit in there passively for a long time. So you can go through, I think one of the good ones is the world's greatest stretch, where you go through that big lunge, you go into the hamstring.
Rotation.
It's a great way of warming up and getting not only the muscles, but the ligaments to get prepped for whatever movements you're going to be doing. And then what you probably see is after the Metcon or whatever, or hard training sessions, people spend 5 minutes after on a bit of mobility. Waste of time. Pointless. That's not going to express the new range. It's not going to take and further that adaptation of getting better in your mobility. Yeah. I always say to people, look, warm down, do your stuff, and then try and put it in the evening.
Personally, after a training session, just sit on a bike, sit on a rower, blood flow.
Get the blood flow.
Normally what you've done is pump your body through full of toxin, lactate, and all you need to do is just you let the muscles use that as a fuel, because it is a fuel, and just cool down, warm down. If you ever went to like athletics as a kid, what would you do? You'd do a jog around the track, would be your cool down. They wouldn't do any fancy stretching. It's just Almost like an engine, just let it tip back down, let it slow back down.
And then that's it. Then you can move into your passive stretching later on that night. You could spend 5-10 minutes on those muscles that you've worked. Keep, like I say, greasing the groove every night, and making them stay in that range where they are, or working on improving into that range.
And normally, if you do it as you said, like you was talking about earlier, where you're in a relaxed state and you're trying to breathe and you're trying to stay in that more rest and digest nervous system, so relaxed nervous system state. Do it before you go to bed. You'll be sleepy. It's
going to help. Yeah,
you'll be sleepy. And
that's where we go to our sleep habits, and you're doing your warm up for sleep. You're going in. So you could go and have a nice hot shower, then you come out, do some of your stretching, go into a nice cool room, dark room. You're out.
There you go.
You're out. A nice setup, and that's like more so for the people who train later. If you're training earlier in the day, obviously you want to shower and stuff. Then you can look at cold therapy. So I know if I have cold showers, I always have that earlier on in the day, and it can brighten you up and make you feel amazing. And just doing that with you if you train earlier in the day.
Yeah, and I think like another priority is prioritize, like we will always go on about this, prioritize good movement. As I said, I touched on the coach called Eugene Teos, an Australian guy, and he's incredibly like strong, and he doesn't live by a warm up. He just says, get in and focus, prioritize movement. Yeah. If you want to do, say, a back squat or a certain movement, warm up with that movement. Get like really, really focused on what you're doing and nail the pattern, as we said. Then you're going to be creating better adaptation through the movement. You're going to eventually get into a little bit better ranges. You're going to feel more comfortable with it. And back to greasing the groove. You're just greasing the groove of the movement, but with consciousness, instead of just coming in and doing a warm up of like back squats and just like going bar on your shoulders, relax, going no.
And again, when we had Sonny Webster come here and do a seminar, everyone was like, what's the mobility? And he goes, well, I don't need to do that. His warm-up is basically grabbing the bar and going through the movement. So going through pulls, going through muscle snatches, because he's good to go. And this is where we're trying to say, if you're coming in and you can't go straight into a squat, that's when you need to go, right, I need to now prioritize some flexibility and mobility training. And then that's when I would say you need to look at one of your training days, taking that out and spending a day on improving that range. Because that's when we can look at intensity levels. Now, if you're doing intensity of training and then you're trying to express intensity mobility, it's going to leave your body pretty beaten up. And then that's when it can have a reverse effect and leave you feeling a lot tighter. So if you're coming in and going, I'm really struggling with my squat, rather than just trying to force through, and like a good saying is, if you keep loading shit with shit, you're going to be more shit. It's not just all of a sudden going to turn into a fucking bouncing unicorn. You're going to fucking squat like shit forever because you're loading more shit on shit. So fix it. So go, right, I need to back off from this and do some of these protocols, get some new ranges, and then build up the strength in your lovely new range.
Yeah, I think everyone's probably heard of Kelly Starrett in the CrossFit world, and his book, I think he's actually changed the name of it, but his mobility, like manual type of thing, is called Supple Leopard, for the reason that a leopard doesn't stand around stretching for half an hour before it attacks a lion. Like a lion, it doesn't fucking eat lions. No, if they did, it's shit. Like a gazelle.
A gazelle, yeah.
It's ready to pounce. It's in the grass. It sees it, bang, it goes.
And that's how I was saying. So when you're coming in, that quick dynamic sort of moving through those ranges, air squats, whatever. We always revert to the back squats because it's the easiest one to try and get you guys to understand without it being too of a complicated movement. And ready to go. And then you're building up whatever strength cycle you're building up through your sets. You get into that top range set, then you might back off. And then that's where we look at, how your hypertrophy or your strength training works. But without that range, again, you're going to load shit and look like shit.
I'd love to see a leopard foam rolling and getting some bands out, banded.
That's what I mean. Could you imagine?
Say to the gazelle, just hold on a sec. I just need to I've got a little bit of a, tight, rotator cuff.
Just do this. Just hold there. I'm just gonna just do my band work, and I'll be right with you. Yeah.
Hey, that leopard ain't fucking eating that.
And again, it's not the fun stuff. It's consistent timing stuff. But if you do put it in, I guarantee within a month you're going to feel better. You're going to see ranges, and you're going to be like, right, yeah, I'm doing this right now. I'm getting what I want out of these movements.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly earlier as well with the stretching. It's like, yeah, everyone wants intensity with everything.
Yeah, it's
don't hit your stretching.
Oh, if I go hard on this, it's gonna fucking go. No, it's not. You gotta.
Like, it's in pain. That means
you gotta trick it. It's tricking it. It's tricking the system. You gotta trick, and the system goes, oh, okay, yeah, this is safe. I'm gonna relax and let it go further.
And you gotta think, like, when you go into these things, you're basically putting, as you said, like muscles and tendons through extended range, through more stress. And you've got to take your time with the recovery, because tendons and ligaments are well known in the field for not having as good blood supply, so they don't heal as well.
No.
So that's why you'll see, like, if someone breaks a leg, like touch wood never happens, 6 weeks you're pretty much back, and depending on the leg break, you do your ankle, your ACL. Probably you might know someone who's done that ACL a year, 2 years. That, like, because the blood supply just isn't there to create the recovery.
Yeah.
So that's where you've got to allow time in between and doing the right things. Like, as I said, after a workout, sit on a bike. It's all about blood flow to promote better recovery. And that goes back to the dry needling as well. And like the cupping and all these therapies. All it is about is just trying to bring blood supply to that area to then remove toxins, give it the nutrients it needs to repair, to regrow, and then create adaptation.
Yeah, that's it. And that, that's where it's like you've got to make sure that you're not doing too little. You've got to do enough. So you've got to
5 minutes once a week.
It's not going to do it. It's not going to do it. Like I say, if you've really got a bad problem, a really limiting problem that you've like, this is bad. So whether it is your hips, flexors, or if it's your hamstrings, or again, we haven't touched overhead, which was my most limiting factor, which I realised was all coming from my lats. So I was working so much, so much on my shoulders that it was actually my lats and my pecs that needed a little bit more work.
And all that bench over the years. With those
not only that, just all those back workouts, just tightening them up. So I had to work a hell of a lot of that to improve my handstands, because without that range, my handstands are just always going to suffer. Again, it's like this. Every time I was going up into a handstand, it was shit, and I kept loading shit. So until I started expressing more of that and getting it starts to get better. But I couldn't just keep trying to do the handstand to make it happen. I had to put in a lot of work now on opening these areas and doing the hard stuff, the grueling stuff, the stuff I'm not enjoying. It doesn't feel nice when I do it, but once you do it and stay consistent with it, it's very rewarding, and then you'll get that enthusiasm to do it more, because you're going, wow, look, I've actually moved 2 inches on this range. It's coming, but it does take time. So for some people, it could be a quick fix, but for some of us, it could be a very long time.
Yeah, and that's like with anything, is consistency breeds results. Strength is easier to stay motivated, stay consistent, because you come in, you deadlift 40 kilos, the next week you deadlift 50. Like, we can see that happens constantly. The flexibility, you might in a month get maybe a degree of change.
Yeah.
And then like another 6 months, another degree of change.
And then there could be a few other aspects you've thrown in there. There could be, we know that stress is a tensioner. There could be a point that you're inflamed for more reasons. You could be a point that you're dehydrated. So when you are doing your flexibility work again, you're like, holy shit, I feel like I've gone backwards. That's when you've got to look at the things around. Or you've done a massive, serious, high intensity workout, forgot to do your mobility, and then 2 days later you go, no, I'm going to do it now, and then you're tight again. It's like you've got these consistencies there. That's the word with everything. Consistency, keep it there. You've got, like I say, greasing the groove every night, working on a training session of just your flexibility and mobility, because it can be a high intensity workout. That time under tension, at that end range of motion, to signal the nervous system to let go, can be a stress factor and can leave you equally as sore the next day. So you got
to think of it as like, because it is all neurological. It's basically all in the mind, like everything. You got to see it like learning a language.
Yes.
Like if you don't know another language, or if you have learnt another language in school, it's not fucking easy to start off with. It's constant practice, constant being around it. And the best way to learn a language, as most people know, is immerse yourself in that language. So you've got to immerse yourself daily, like do it, see it, like talk, like.
But balance it.
And
not too little, not too much. If you do too
thing.
much, the body will fight back.
And you can get creative with it as well. We're not saying it has to be like the static.
Yeah, so I think like doing like 3 rounds of, say, 3 components, like a superset.
Yeah.
You know, so you could look at, you know, expressing the motion, the mobility. Then you could look at going into like the PNF or the pales and rails, and then you can go into like a passive range. And then do that again 3 times.
All 3.
There you go, all 3. Do that all, you know, in a row, and just each time try and take it to the next step. So if you go, okay, I got to this range this time, but I'm still comfortable. Next time I'm going to go a little bit more, and then with your they work in harmony. They will work in harmony. The strength and the flexibility will work really, really well.
Yeah, and I think something we didn't touch on is well, it is, you said, with the toe touch. The toe touch is a great test. It's like training, track and measure, test. Like there's a really good one that we'll put up in regards to looking at ankle dorsiflexion, where you basically measure the degree of shin angle, and there's a test. You're going to see progression. If you're not, it's very subjective. It's like, okay, 1 week I was here, 6 months later I was here, and it's like, oh, it doesn't look any difference, but maybe that's 4 degrees.
Yeah,
and that's 4 degrees on like a 40-degree angle. It's fucking like, it's 10% change. It's good.
It's good.
Really
and,
good.
And then, like I say, you could get like exactly like that. You could get a point where within 2 weeks you've gone through a massive range because the body's adjusted to it really quick. And but then it will get to the really sticky part where then it will start to slow down. And then that's where you feel like, oh, it's not going to happen. It will. Stay consistent. Keep doing it, and you'll get it.
That's like, yeah. And there is, like with all of this, there is, yeah, definitely a limiting factor. There's going to be a point where you can't go any further. Like you will have predetermined that down to as we spoke about, like kind of gender, hormones, and then also like genetics.
Oh, and then that becomes a much more sort of like case where, okay, if it is joint on joint and stuff like that, like you've worn out tissues, and or that's
positions of hips, positions of shoulders, like skeletal changes.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of other things that come into play, but I like with everyone, it's quite easy to turn around and just go, oh yeah, it's genetics. It's genetics that I'm like that. It's like, maybe have you given it the time, if you put in the conscious effort to work movement patterns alongside flexibility, alongside mobility, to then over a long period of time, don't just do it for a week, 6 weeks and be like, oh yeah, I didn't get any change, this is terrible. It's like anything, you got to give it time.
Give it time.
Give it time.
Stay consistent with it, and you know, and if you really are struggling with it, then find someone who understands it, and they can give you basically like a training program to fit in with your daily routines of training. That's going to work for you. It's just being consistent with it, and again, not doing too little, not doing too much, working through the different ranges and stuff that we've said, expressions of flexibility and mobility, and just put it into practice, and you will get where you want. Your movements will start fluently be, you know, better. You will probably start to notice strength increasing, because, you know, if you've got a tight muscle, it's going to be very hard to try and make that get stronger when it's tight.
Well, also, yeah, and it doesn't send, like, if something's blocked and tightened up, it doesn't send signals as well to the brain. So you're not going to create as much adaptation in that side, or that muscle group or whatever. So yeah, actually, like having a tight group of muscles or muscle can actually limit the potential hypertrophy and strength progression of that side through the signals. All we are is just little fucking atoms going across our body, like throughout constantly. But yeah, like there's loads of other things to take into account rather than just like the flexibility and mobility that we touched on. But yeah, like Tristan's always got some good knowledge. He's more than me. I'm, as Conor McGregor said, stiff as a board. So.
After this podcast, we will, if you look onto our Instagram page, we will put on some followers on here. So I'll put on there like a hamstring routine. I'll try and put on there as a quad routine, an overhead routine, just a little quick sort of like 3-round sort of thing that you can express and start using and go, okay, and putting it through. We will do that for you guys. So that, without going further into it, this is a great place to start. You know, go through this again. If you find anything too confusing, reach out to us, message us, and start putting it into play, because it will make you feel better. Especially
Stop wasting your time
stop coming in and grabbing a band and rolling around on the roller and thinking that's your mobility. It's a number. It's just numbing you so you can do your training, and that's a problem. There's areas that need to be loosened off and gained back with the right protocols. Not saying don't do a foam roller, because like I say, there's times when I need that lacrosse ball to work out a bit of tissue work. 100%.
Just be mindful of what it's doing in the long term.
But yeah, just don't get caught up on thinking that those tools are your mobility. That's not. Your movement, your expression, taking range of motion, that is your flexibility and mobility. So
go back to that Charles Poliquin.
Yeah, again,
in the range
look at that.
There you go.
It is all about that. So if you like this episode, please push a like button, guys. If you're on iTunes, please leave a review. It will help us out to take things forward and get out there to more people who probably need to hear this and start putting it into play. But that's the end of today. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll catch you on the next one.
See you later.